Yep.
We're there.
Yep.
We're there, Charles.
Okay.
Happy hump day, Charles.
Yes. Same to you, my brother. Same to you. Hope you had a
This,
good day. Hope you had a good day today. We got a lot to cover.
well,
And
considering the events of the day, yeah, yeah. I tell you, let me just get this stuff set up here real quick.
oh yeah. Aloha, folks. We're just getting everything set up because we're coming on a little earlier than expected. Just because we have a lot to cover. There's a lot of things in the hopper right now. And what I mean by hopper is what we would like to discuss. So,
Yeah, so we'll hang out a little while. Of course, Sherry, Tyson, of course, you regulars, Mona, all you guys, thank you. Let's get ready to rumble. I'm gonna wait a little bit before I have a I just wanted to say real quick mahalo to my friend Tommy, or all of our friends, Tommy from TNT Tinting.
yes.
Um, but yeah, Charlie, a lot of oh God, what happened to my light? Um, I don't even know where to start, man. I don't even know where to start. Right? Let's give it a few minutes though. But while we're waiting, let me do this. Hey, Tommy, I just want to thank Tommy Silva from TNT Tinting because today when I went to the mailbox, there was a little priority mail box. Charlie, take a look at this, Charlie. I want you to see this,
No, 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 no. I don't want to take a look
man.
at.
And he sent a box. I started collecting, thanks to Tyson Moises, I started collecting sports cards. So I got all excited because I thought it was sports cards coming in the mail. And then
Mhm.
when I looked at the return address and it was from Tommy, I said, "What the heck is Tommy?" I thought maybe he was had put in some tint for my windows for my eyeglasses. And then I opened them up and it was all this candy bars. Oops. But the
Well,
thing
I
is,
don't know what to say. It's been really hot today, so I don't know what. Oh, look what I got.
but
I
bro,
saw I saw your post. Yes, I saw
hey,
your
Tommy's
post.
on. Tommy's on, man. Tommy's on. But this is the big cup, Joe. Joe. Why am I calling you Joe? This Charlie. This is the big cup. Big cup. I don't even know if Kawhi has the big cup. So Tommy, thank you, man. You the
Okay,
man.
Mel, Mel, Mel. This is the big package. I don't know if Kawhi get the big package, but I get the
Yeah,
big package.
but that's the fun size. This is the real man size. I get two of them. And look, when was the last time you saw this, man? The only time I ever ate Butterfinger was during Halloween because that's the one nobody wanted.
I thought you was gonna say when you was playing football.
Oh no. Oof. Twix, the big, these are all the jumbo size. Oh, and look at this. Look, almond joy. Patsy, this is gonna be,
Oh my goodness.
and then, bro, heaven on earth.
Yeah.
Kit Kat king size. Tommy, you are an angel. Thank you so much.
I would like to say too, it's most individuals who do this, like what we do now, coming on air, most individuals will not eat in front of you folks. Okay, I want to let you know that now. But I gotta tell you honestly, I'm not most individuals, so I
Well,
am gonna eat in front of you now.
oh, Charlie, that is not good, Charlie. That I
Well,
mean, really,
I'm
Charlie.
sorry. I
Charlie,
can't put it back in a package. It's open already. It's
Charlie,
a recess.
Charlie,
Mm.
maintain. Charlie, you need to make. We have a nationally acclaimed show.
Mm.
I mean, that's like taboo. We talked about this before we started that we would never do that.
Yeah, but my
Charlie,
hearing aid, the battery was kind of weak.
Charlie,
Mm.
you should never
Mm.
eat when we're live.
Oh man.
You can eat
Man.
before the live. You can eat when we do the ramp up before we
Mhm.
click that button. But mm,
Mm.
man,
Oh man. I'm sorry.
oh my God. Okay,
Oh my god.
I'll tell you what,
Mm.
Charlie. Let's change that rule right now.
Yeah.
Can
Mm.
now we can eat
Yeah.
when we're live.
Well,
Oh
I
my
was going to
God.
tell you, whatever rule you have, the hell with the rule, because I'm going to eat anyway.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we got a special show. Dr. Jerome Kim, all the way from South Korea, uh, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute. And for many of you, you guys missed the last time he was on. We got a bunch of new viewers.
He
So
was unbelievable.
this guy's
Unbelievable.
from Honolulu, right out of Honolulu. Military. We'll share a little bit about him when he comes on.
Hmm.
But this guy was a local boy, Honolulu boy, joined the service to get educated, became a doctor, and now he's the director general, the boss at the International Vaccine Institute, and he's going to bring us up to speed on what is going on with the vaccine. Whether you agree or disagree, whether you're going to take them or not, information for you, man. What do you want to do with it, or
You
not?
know,
I
I
know.
noticed
Go ahead.
he was the gentleman that now runs the CDC. That's who he worked with. I mean, and
Yeah.
even what that Dr. Birkin that works with Fauci that would do
Hmm.
those press conferences at the White House, he was with her too. And I just like to say that I want to say that I worked with when after the police department, I worked with a Dr. Reese's, and this is his cousin right here, Reese's peanut butter cup.
I apologize. I guess I said Honolulu wrong. Sorry, I Portuguese. Sometimes when I talk fast, the words come out wrong. I understand it's Honolulu. If I said Honolulu, I sorry. I meant Honolulu. I had a text, a message. I think you might have seen them, Charlie,
Hmm.
about from a gentleman who said, "Why don't we use our PSAs, our show, to talk about the mortality rate and about um, the false positives on the tests?"
Hmm.
I responded. I said, we have had doctor after doctor, of experts come on the show. And maybe this gentleman doesn't watch the show. I'm not sure. I think I've seen him on a few times. He's a
Hmm.
friend of mine. Anyway, we've talked about the mortality rate. We've talked
Yeah.
about the mortality rate, and every doctor has said it's between 8 and 10 times more deadly than the flu. And we've also had expert after expert testing, the doctors that do testing, that has shared all the knowledge about the different types of tests and the effectiveness of each different test. So I'm not sure where we fell short. If we did, I apologize. If you have someone that is willing to come on our show, our door's open. Our door's open. This is not a one-sided show. I know a lot of people think that way because, based on the comments, maybe they disagree with what the experts are saying. But trust me, we are not screening our prospects. We ask, we invite, and again, we have invited a lot of people, and I would say the majority of them are unable to make it, or they choose not to come on.
Hmm.
It's not because we haven't tried. So if you have anybody that that has an opposing point of view, uh, make the contact. Let us know. We'll get them on. There's absolutely no limitation to what comes on this show. Absolutely not. But I will say we've had the discussion about the mortality rate. People get confused. Yeah, they try to paint this as a very minor virus, and that's fine. If that's what you believe in, I respect that. But the reality, the medical science, the medical experts say this is a very deadly virus, and that's it is what it is. All right, it is what it is. So anyway, Charlie, we get about 10, 13 minutes
Yep.
before Dr. Kim comes on.
Let's talk about what happened
Today,
with.
a lot of developments, man. A lot of developments.
Yep. Yep.
I don't know where you want to start. Where you want to start? Inner Island
Just
extended. Sorry, Hawaii residents. We don't have enough tests for you, so you stuck.
see
Trans-Pacific.
that's I want to get the clarification. I want to get a
Yeah.
clarification on that. So that means that we cannot get a test to bypass the 14-day quarantine. We have to go through the 14-day quarantine, correct?
Correct. Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Unless
But
you want tourists from the mainland
yeah,
or you're a returning visitor, so you can go Vegas. You saw Hawaii going to start Vegas tomorrow. Hawaii going to start their Vegas runs.
right,
They
right,
cranking them up.
right,
But for all of the mainland people that like come Hawaii,
right.
e como mai. Where's the line? Here we go. E como mai. And you
So
know what? Visitors, you don't need to worry about the locals because they're stuck in their homes. They're stuck in their homes on a 14-day quarantine.
that's what I
Cannot
thought.
even go see. Cannot go see Tutu. Cannot go see your kids on the neighbor island. Cannot go. I am angry. I am just angry, Charlie. Um when I heard that, and to even say that we don't have enough testing for the locals. You know, remember early on where we were talking about doing certain requirements for visitors? All of a sudden, Attorney General says, "Hey, you cannot do that. You cannot treat the locals different than the visitors." Uh, Amnesia? Maybe we get amnesia. We ostracizing the locals, man. We telling the locals, sorry, we don't have enough tests for you. We're not going to work on deal with CVS and all of these places like we did for the tourists. We're not going to work with Oakland Airport that's going to give tests, free tests to anybody that departs out of Oakland Airport coming to Hawaii will get a free test, compliments of Oakland. Well, guess who flies direct from Oakland? Hawaiian Airlines. Hawaiian Airlines. Everything is now it's coming together, right? We're starting to see who's really driving the ship. But what infuriates me the most, Charlie, is we, the local people now. You can go to Honolulu, no problem. You can go to Honolulu and pick up the virus. You can go, no quarantine on Oahu, but you can come back home. Sorry, man. Quarantine, bro. Quarantine. No CVS for you. No all of these other fancy companies that the lieutenant governor has made deals with for our tourists. Sorry, we just no more the testing ability in Hawaii.
You know what is more? You know what is more ludicrous? You think about it now, with the exception of unfortunately, the rise on the Big Island, but for the most part, they've been down. They've been down for the most part, right? So you get three counties: Maui, the Big Island, Hawaii Island, and Kauai. Our rates, infectious rates, are way, way lower than Oahu. Yet we getting penalized because not even Oahu has a quarantine. That's hard. That's hard to swallow. That is very hard to
No,
swallow.
that's why I
Now,
wore
at
my
the same
shirt. I wore my
token,
special shirt tonight. I wore my special shirt tonight. I was actually going to dress up for the director general, but after today, I think we got to remind some people. We got to remind some people. Don't be an asshole. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't be an opukole puka. Okay, stop it already. Stop it. Sorry.
but
Told you.
here is the thing that's most fascinating, and that is what makes them think that doing it this way it is going to curb the spread. Look at today's numbers, how the thing went bounce right back up again. So my question is this: is the contact tracing program working or not?
No. No.
Okay,
The
I
whole
just
system isn't working, Charlie, and that's why it's so frustrating. So today there's a press conference, the governor's first press conference in a few weeks. He comes before the camera and he turns out he shows out this new program about giving everybody one $500 food card. You can even buy alcohol with that thing. How's that? But anyway, a distraction, Charlie. A distraction. I watched that thing. I couldn't even watch I actually was able to watch more of last night's presidential debate than I could on today's press conference because it was this fluff again, the distraction, the stroke, telling everybody, hey, this is what we're doing for you. And on the backside, we're screwing you because we don't have enough tests for your quarantine. But hey, take this $500 and shut your mouth. Be happy what you get. That's how I'm taking it. I'm sorry for being so angry, but this is 7 months already, people. 7 months. And every single day, we get screwed. Every single day I watch the morning news and I keep hearing about how safe this new travel policy is, about all the new partners and all the testing available for the mainland people. All of a sudden, yeah, they got to pay their own tests. So what? Airlines reducing their rates, their fares are dirt cheap. So it's not, these guys are going to come, they're going to pay the money. And the biggest flaw, Charlie, Dr. John last night told us, Dworkin, you go there, you take a test, your 72-hour test, come back positive. You throw that paper away. You just throw them away and you come through and quarantine. Just quarantine. You know you're not going to quarantine. You know you're going to come and escape quarantine. But there's no interconnectivity. So when you get
do you know why? You know why he said that? Do you know why he said you're not going to quarantine? Because if somebody throws away the test in the first place, that already tells you of the person's conduct, what
Right.
they're planning on doing. Yeah.
Yes. That's a good point. Good point. That person is not a good person. So now
Yep.
that person comes here because he's not sick. He's gonna think, hey, I'm the asymptomatic. I'm gonna stay away from people. I go wear my mask, but I ain't staying in a hotel. I'm gonna go out. But no, we had 7 months. And even if you went back 3 months, you had 3 months to set up a system where the results would be electronically submitted from the testing lab to the state of Hawaii. So you cannot cheat. No, 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 no. I can go online right now. One thing this show has done for me is it teach me how to use a lot of programs, so we can produce this show. I can make a fake uh, test result quite simply. Seriously, I could make one right now, print them, and carry them with me everywhere I go. Police stop me. Oh, here's my paper. Oh, thank you, sir. You're on your way. I tell you, and I hate saying this, but I hope I'm wrong because I say it so often. But when again, Charlie, you talked about the nurses, they're flying in nurses now. I don't know what, over 100 nurses so far, and we barely handled the last surge. We didn't have visitors coming in. That was just a local surge. I'm sure there was some travel related cases, but the bottom line is we didn't have this influx of 4, 5, 6, 7,000 new people coming in every day, and we're at our capacity. We're at our capacity. I don't care. You said you only have so many beds. You can send as many nurses as you want. You don't have the beds. So anyway, I'm furious. Yeah, HSTA did a press conference today. They're pissed off because the state has kind of ignored the
Yeah.
minimum CDC guidelines. This state is out of control. This state is out of control. There is absolutely no leadership, no guidance, and the medical community is screaming and yelling and offering suggestions and recommendations, and it's not being heard. Well, it's being heard, it's just not being listened to. So I don't know. We're going to talk about a lot of things tonight with Dr. Kim, but I hope he's going to be able to chime in on what's happening in Hawaii. I really do.
Well, I got this question from Anthony. Do you have to have a negative result to board the plane? As of right now, the airlines is not making it mandatory. They're offering the test if you come to Hawaii because they know that Hawaii has these provisions set up that you have to pre-test. It doesn't say to board the plane. It's to avoid. It's to bypass the quarantine provision. Okay, that's what it is. So you don't need a negative test to board a plane, because remember what they said before. If we were to, we would be controlling our borders way in advance. But they said you cannot stop air travel. It's a federal thing. It has to be a federal mandate, and that's not allowed. So
Well,
you can board the plane, but you don't have to have a test.
everybody, now is the time. Dr. Kim is in the waiting room. Share this right now. Please share this right now. Hit the share button. Let's get this information out. See, it's up to us now. See, it's up to us. This is where we take control. The people of Hawaii are going to take control, and we have to. Okay, we have to. All right, let's bring in Dr. Kim, man. I'm excited. I'm excited.
Bing. There he is.
There he
There he is.
is.
Hey, Mel. Charlie, how are you?
Doing
안녕하세요.
good.
So,
I still remember some. How are you, Doc?
doing well. And you?
Good, good, good. Thank you for.
Thank
I
you.
know you're a busy guy, and of course you remember Charlie up
Yeah,
there on the
I'm
screen.
Yep.
Thank
I
you
like
for
that
joining us.
background.
Yeah, it's nice.
Love that
nice.
background. Yeah. Is
yeah,
this in
we've
your
got it from-
residency?
Sorry?
Is that in your residence there?
Yeah, it's the Korean Thanksgiving. So
Oh.
everyone has
Oh,
next couple of days off.
awesome,
Oh,
awesome.
good.
I'm glad you got a little bit of chance to rest. And again, I thank you. I know you're a busy guy. So we'll just get right in it, Doc. I mean, we have a lot of new viewers since the last time. We have a ton of new viewers. So maybe introduce yourself a little bit. share again. I didn't want to screw it up, so I didn't want to do it. And then maybe you can give us an update on what's going on with the vaccine. We heard the other night a presidential debate that it's only a few weeks away. It's a
Yeah.
non-political show, so I ain't, I'm just saying what I heard, and maybe you can help clarify. And then
Okay.
hopefully we'll have some time to discuss what's going on in Hawaii with our travel policy, and get your thoughts
Sure.
on that. So we
That
okay?
sounds good. Yep.
All right, man. Thank you, sir. The floor is yours.
All right. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Charlie. And so my name is Jerome Kim. I work at the International Vaccine Institute in Seoul, South Korea. It's an international organization that makes vaccines for global health. So we discover, develop, and deliver vaccines. Now with COVID, actually IVI doesn't have its own candidate. We decided that with 200 plus vaccines out there, that it would be better for us probably to try and help move a vaccine along more quickly. So I speak with no preference for any vaccine or in any way favor any of the different vaccines. But we do work on them. And so with that introduction, how would you like me to start? Just where we are?
Well, I mean, the last time you were on, yeah, you were it was relatively new. I mean, not new, but it was still a lot of things were going on. Has much changed since then, as far as narrowing this thing down to where we're getting close to a vaccine?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Actually, the number of vaccines that's under kind of research and development has increased. So really, literally, there are over 200 in various stages. Some of them are still in animal testing. Some of them have been dreamt of, but aren't even in the lab yet. But there are 8 and maybe more candidates either currently in the final stage of testing or on the verge of entering that phase of testing. And they run the gamut. So this is where the kind of horse race starts, right? Probably the vaccine that started in phase 3 soonest is one from Oxford University. It's actually being made by a drug company, not a vaccine company, named AstraZeneca. And AstraZeneca has partnered with groups all over the world. They've gotten billions of dollars in US government funding in order to advance this vaccine candidate. They are the vaccine that went on hold temporarily. So trials in the rest of the world started pretty soon after they were put on, that they paused the study. They didn't act, the US FDA didn't say, halt, don't move any farther, but the company voluntarily paused the study because they had a safety issue arise, and other countries looked at the safety data and said, go ahead, keep going. And AstraZeneca has been doing this since May. So if you think now, you're enrolling tens of thousands of people and you're waiting for infections to develop in the group that was not vaccinated, and hopefully very few in the group that was vaccinated, AstraZeneca might be in the lead. The next 2 candidates are actually not American or Western vaccines at all. They're from China. And they're similar kinds of vaccines. AstraZeneca's vaccine is kind of a new version. It's made in something called the chimpanzee adenovirus. So they take the chimpanzee adenovirus virus, they insert a little piece of COVID-19, and that's what makes the vaccine. With the Chinese vaccines, what they did was they just grew the virus up. They grew up the Wuhan strain of SARS-CoV-2, of COVID-19, and they killed it. And that's actually, one of the simplest and easiest ways to make a vaccine. And so the Chinese companies have rolled out testing. It looks like it makes the right protective responses. We don't know that it protects, but it's generating these infection-fighting proteins called antibodies and T cells, which theoretically help the immune system respond to the virus. And both those vaccines are in phase 3. And in fact, the Chinese government has given what they call emergency use authorization, which is kind of what the President Trump was talking about. But they're allowing people to receive this vaccine, even though we don't know that the vaccine is safe and effective. So even though you don't know the vaccine is safe and effective, certain people in China, maybe hundreds of thousands of people in China, have already received the vaccine. We don't know it's safe. We don't know it's effective, but the government's going ahead and letting people use it.
Is it voluntary, Doc? I hate to interrupt, but is it voluntary or are they?
It is voluntary. And so it's really difficult to tell exactly what's going on. But according to one newspaper source, they were citing an official in the company. People actually sign a consent form of some sort that says, we understand this may not protect us at all. not only may not protect us, but I don't know if they actually signed something that says and could do us harm, because we really don't know safety and efficacy. So the next set of candidates are actually an American company, actually two American companies. One called Moderna, which is a brand new type of vaccine. There's no similar form that's licensed. It's called RNA. And the other one is from Pfizer, also an RNA vaccine in collaboration with a company in Germany. And both of these vaccines started at the end of July. And so when President Trump was talking about, or when people are talking about, well, we could have a vaccine by October, it's typically one of these two vaccines. And the big question is, they started the 27th of July. This is a 2-dose vaccine. So the second dose was presumably given to the very first people who started on the 27th of August, the second dose, which means that you really haven't had much time by the end of October to really collect enough endpoints of the people who've acquired infection. And to do that, most people estimate you need 150. No one knows where they are right now. Everyone thinks that, probably by the end of the year, they'll have enough of these endpoints of people who've acquired infection to tell us, did the vaccine work or didn't it work? And that's where the race is right now. Other companies like Johnson & Johnson have similar kinds of vaccines. They're beginning, or actually they've started what we call phase 3, but they're a bit behind. So they probably won't get an answer really till the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So again, the November to January timeframe, we could be starting to see results of what they call the interim analysis. So when you set up one of these giant trials, 30,000 people, you enroll 15,000 in vaccine and 15,000 people get an inactive substance or sometimes a vaccine that isn't for specific for COVID. And those are the control group. And you start people off and, at a certain point in the statistical plan, you can peak. Now you can't do it that often because every time you peak, you get a penalty. It's kind of like peaking at a Christmas present, the statisticians, the people who make sure that the study is done correctly, issue a penalty every time you look. But the companies design it that way so that they are allowed to look at certain points. And that's where we may start to see evidence that the vaccine is protecting against infection or not. So if it is protecting against infection at a significant, and usually the bar is set pretty high for this. If it really looks promising, then the company can go ahead and talk to the FDA. And what the FDA will do at that point, really no one is quite sure. The head of the FDA published an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association that said, of course, we will follow all the rules. And that's a promise that he made last month. And hopefully they'll stick to that. But again, we don't really know because the president is talking about, well, maybe we'll get something and we'll get it approved. We'll have a vaccine. No one knows. But according to what the FDA has said, they will follow the usual criteria for issuing a statement about this vaccine. And the usual criteria are the criteria that make it possible that American children get safe and effective vaccines. So it's worked if we follow the system, and I think that's the big question. And the rest of the vaccines are in various stages of development, and they could be, we could have answers with them in the first quarter of next year, or maybe up to the middle of next year. And that's kind of the race. I think that the big question will be, what are you going to do the day after you have efficacy? Right. So there's a big announcement. Maybe the president comes on TV, the head of the FDA. We have a vaccine, and it protects against infection at the following level, 60%. And, so what are we going to do the day after? Are we going to be able to line up and get the vaccine? Are we going to know that it's safe? Or is this the vaccine that we'll be using 10 years from now? We don't know the answers to those questions, but it's important that we ask because, the first question to ask is, okay, so who's going to make this vaccine? You'll need 8 billion doses, 16 billion doses. And will it meet all the quality requirements? Because not only Americans need it, people in Europe, people in Africa, people in South America really need a vaccine also. The second question is, how are we going to distribute it? And in the beginning, it's like, when Teslas first came out, it was hard to get them. Vaccine will be the same way, because the companies have to ramp up production. Now, some of the companies are starting to produce vaccine already. We say they're producing vaccine at risk. They don't know the vaccine is going to work, but the government's giving them funding in order to make sure that when and if the vaccine is successful, they have maybe 300 million doses ready. And that would mean that Americans could start to get vaccinated. Although I think many of the public officials are saying that probably in America, there won't be widespread availability till the middle of next year. So we say Q2 and Q3. So sometime between March and August, there'll be wider availability of vaccine in the United States. And then the question is, how do we get it out to everybody else? Because until there are enough people vaccinated around the world, there's always the risk that someone's, maybe an American, maybe someone who's coming to visit or work, will bring the virus back, and then people who aren't vaccinated will be potentially infected. So we're not all really safe until we've got this problem in control all over the world. And then the big question is, okay, so we got all that, we have enough vaccine. Now, how are we going to get it out to everybody? And I mean, I don't know if you remember in the 2009 flu pandemic, right? I mean, in Washington, anywhere where we used to live, there were people lining up outside of CVS to get the vaccine. And then there were other people who saying they didn't want it. And, there were some fights about people in line. And, how are we, in America, we have a particular form of distributed vaccine. In other parts of the world, the system is a little more systematic. In Korea, the government may provide it at government-run hospitals, at clinics, and they'll provide the vaccine. In other parts of the world, people have to go on a week, or governments have to conduct mass vaccination campaigns. And the big difference is, we don't often give vaccines to adults. This vaccine, a lot of the vaccine is going to go to adults. So how are we going to get adults to skip a day of work or skip a half day of work to line up and get a vaccine? All of these questions are things that we have to think about as we think about the day after. The day after. So
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
it's gonna be a mad rush and trying to get this thing out. I mean, I guess the first step is getting the vaccine and making sure that we have something. I guess the first question. Let me just get this question out of the way because I saw it pop up twice. Does the flu shot give you any benefit against COVID?
So not against COVID itself, but the problem is that we have COVID circulating and the flu circulating. So it's better to protect yourself against both of those viruses. And I think that's the reason why governments all over the world are really, really strongly encouraging people to get vaccinated for the flu. Because the last thing we want is for the flu season to fill up the hospitals with sick people, and then for COVID, an outbreak of COVID to come on top of that. So, Korea had been relatively well controlled, but in August, they had a major outbreak, thousands of people. And in Seoul, which is 10 million people, the intensive care unit bed capacity and the ability of the hospitals to carry more people who were not necessarily intensive care unit, but who had to be isolated, almost reached the maximum.
Wow.
I mean, so they were prepared to ship people out, and they had second-tier hospitals that could have taken additional overflow. But part of the issue is that the flu season fills our hospitals up, and if we had COVID and the flu, where would we put people? And that's, I think, another concern.
So your advice is take the flu shot.
I'm going to get mine as soon as I can.
Okay. And let me just get this one here, Charlie, real quick. You've been in the vaccination industry, I guess, whatever you want to call it, and research for many, many, many years. Do you feel comfortable that the pace that we're going, it seems like it's relatively quick, that we're at this point already, as opposed to a normal vaccine, which I've been told is 18 months to 2 years, depending. Are you comfortable with the process and the timeline that has occurred since we started the race for the vaccine?
Yeah, so usually it's 5 to 10 years. That's the figure that we use. And so this has moved very fast, very, very fast. Now for the flu, it's a year, but the flu is a vaccine we make every year. So we're used to it. This is something, and it's not a new virus. It's it's an old virus with slightly different form or different strain. For COVID-19, it's an entirely new virus, and we don't know that much about it. So the things that make me comfortable are, we understand the technology. We think we understand protective responses, although we don't know, for instance, how long they last. We don't know how protective they are. Do they actually prevent infection? Or could you still get infected but have a very mild version of COVID-19, which would be great too. On the one hand, on the other hand, you could still be infectious while you've got this lower level of infection. And that could impact what we call herd immunity. And since everyone's talking about it, herd immunity is the thing that we want to see. And not all the vaccines may have that. So again, we have to understand the vaccine, understand how it's protecting and what it's doing. And then maybe we can make some good policy decisions around how many people need to be vaccinated, how quickly, and who. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with that. Sorry, go ahead, Charlie.
So the last time we talked about the question of producing this virus, and you explained to us about that fingerprint that normally when it's touched by humans, it'll leave a certain mark on it. But early on, you said that with regards to what China is doing now, by creating it and then killing it, the virus, is that if they create it and just say they let it go, is there a human fingerprint on that as well? So it's known that it's man-made, or how would you be able to tell?
So the virus for the vaccine actually was
Yeah.
isolated from a patient in Wuhan, and then was grown
Okay.
in the kinds of cells that we use to grow vaccines. So vaccines are grown in eggs. They can, depending on the type of vaccine, they can be grown in armyworm cells. That's one of the forms that they use now. So it's just they took the virus and they put the virus itself into these cells, and the virus can grow. And so that would look like natural virus. In fact, when you do that kind of manufacturing, it has to be done under something called ESL3, which is a very high level of containment, which means that many vaccine manufacturers around the world wouldn't be able to do this, because that level of biosafety confinement is really limited to a few vaccine manufacturers, even in the United States. So yeah, it's not, they didn't create it. They just took the virus from an infected person and used that to create we called it the cell lines that make the vaccine. And there isn't any genetic modification.
So is it possible, I guess the layman's question is it possible to produce this virus under those, what you just talked about, that circumstance, and release it biologically, do a release on it? Is it possible?
Yeah, so once the virus is isolated from a human, it can be then transferred into a tissue culture. That's in fact how we isolate most viruses. So the HIV virus, it took a long time. It took us 2 years, 3 years to figure out how to do that, how to actually grow it, because that's actually a really critical part of being able to do all the science on it is to be able to find the virus. So when you have a person with an unknown virus, you often take their blood and you put it into different kinds of cells to see if you can cause the virus to grow. And hopefully the virus that you grow out of the virus looks like the virus that you put in there. Actually, with HIV, it was slightly different, and we didn't find that out right away. But that's a really important question. There are very few companies around the world that have this level of biocontainment, and it's typically to manufacture polio vaccine. So the Chinese companies and an Indian company have this type. We call it a whole inactivated vaccine, similar to what they do for polio, which is why typically the companies that do the polio vaccine that way have the capacity to manufacture the vaccine. And it tends to be cheaper. You can make a lot of it. It tends to be cheaper. So from a vaccine manufacturing perspective, it's simpler and maybe cheaper. And so for global health reasons, that could be a vaccine that is very important.
Well, the reason I asked that question is because we still, from the last time you visited us and now, we still have those conspiracy theorists that said that this whole virus was hatched in a lab, and then it was released, and it was like like a chemical biological warfare from China, basically releasing this thing that spread all the way to the U.S. So that's the reason why I asked that question. But
No,
thank
no,
you.
I understand. It's still a, I mean, that the conspiracy theory is still out there, but I think most of the scientists are pretty convinced that this is not a virus that was, cooked up in a lab but those conspiracy theories have existed before. There was a conspiracy theory that the US Army invented the HIV virus. And it actually was circulated, this came out in Gorbachev's biography. It was planted by the KGB in an Indian communist newspaper and publicized around the time of the International AIDS Conference, so it got picked up. And so this does happen. And, unfortunately now the ability to spread things on, on Twitter and Facebook and other social media things is just so great. Once they get started, they're difficult to shut down, even if they're, groundless or untrue.
Yeah, and it's really it just counterproductive when that stuff hits and it flows and it flies and everybody starts talking about it and referring people to articles that or posts, I should say, not even articles, and then people start believing that stuff. What was the biggest? I know because you were, for those of you that don't know, Dr. Kim was very instrumental with the HIV race back then. What's the I don't even that's the appropriate way to say it, but what are you finding is a big difference between the HIV when you were guys were working on the HIV virus versus the COVID? What's one of the major differences aside from the transmission? Obviously, the COVID transmission is so much more easier to transmit. But what as far as the race for a vaccine, what's the major differences?
Yeah, other than the fact that COVID is much more transmissible, I think that the big difference is, with HIV, you can be in, your body can't clear the infection. I mean, so there are over 40 million or roughly 40 million people around the world living with HIV/AIDS. A lot of them, a good number of them, are now, thanks to the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, getting antiretroviral therapy, and a very good number have completely suppressed the virus. The problem is that as soon as you remove the medicine, the virus comes back. The normal human defensive system, the immune system, isn't able to contain HIV. It continues to grow and progress, that gradually killing off the immune system until a person develops AIDS and then dies. The difference here is that you've seen, I mean, the vast majority of people with COVID-19 infection, maybe 98% or more, survive, get rid of the virus, and it doesn't come back. So the normal human immune system can defeat the virus. And that's one of the reasons I think many people are hopeful that it should be possible to develop a vaccine fairly quickly. With HIV, not only can your immune system not eliminate the virus, but your immune system is churning out these infection-fighting proteins to fight the virus in your body, if you're HIV infected. But you can still be reinfected by an additional strain. So it's unable to contain the virus within the infected person. And also, it doesn't necessarily protect you against incoming HIV either. So there's something about the immune response to HIV that is not protective. Whereas we think the immune response against COVID-19 is protective. And that could be important because that means having a vaccine be able to mimic or imitate that natural infection is probably possible, is doable. And I think that's why people are optimistic.
Is there any evidence so far that this COVID-19 virus has mutated at all, or is it? I remember the last time I believe it was you. I think it was you. In fact, it was you that said that the rate of mutation was very slow in the COVID-19. Has that changed at all, or is that still pretty much the same?
No, and I think people are starting to publish some of their data. So actually, I think the easiest thing to do is to compare it to, let's see, if you were to take a pin and make a hole in a piece of paper, and that is the amount of sequence variation. That little hole in the piece of paper is the amount of variation in a COVID-19 in roughly 70,000 full-length strains of COVID-19. Now, if you take the tip of my finger, that is about the amount of sequence variation in a single year for influenza. And if you take my palm, that's the amount of sequence variation in a single year of HIV in a single country.
Wow.
So COVID-19's replication, rate of mutation is 10 times lower than influenza. So there are strains though, and you can track them around the world. They're very small changes compared to influenza or HIV, but it's still present. Could the vaccines fail to work? That's actually a really important question. There have been a couple of well-documented cases of reinfection with COVID. There aren't many. And, one of the big questions is, can a person are these reinfections the result of viruses that are not responsive, the usual immune responses that vaccines will generate? And we don't know that information. At least one case in Korea is a different strain. So a person was infected with one strain and reinfected with a second strain. But we don't know what that means.
But you did say the last time you heard that you're pretty sure that the way these vaccines were being developed, because the mutation rate was so small, or that these vaccines should be pretty effective in covering the virus, even though they had that very small mutation. And I would assume that's, and I'm sorry if I'm asking the same question. I'm just trying to figure out if anything's changed since the last time you were on.
No, that's a good question. And it's one that we, are struggling with, but I don't think so. There is one study where they vaccinated a monkey with a DNA vaccine. This is the company called Inovio, and it's been in the newspaper recently. The Inovio vaccine protected, against the challenge. But then one of the other things that they did was they tested to see whether the monkey, whether the antibodies, the infection-fighting proteins that were generated from that vaccination would cross-protect against a different virus. And in fact, it did. It cross-protected against the virus that's now more widely circulating in Europe, actually now in Asia and in the United States. So there was some cross-protection. Now remember that we're doing all of this in a test tube. And what we really need to know is, does it protect people in the real world?
There's a question, Doc, that someone asked, if you believe a country with a population such as China could only have 2,000 infections since May.
Yeah, so, the Chinese have really used all the forces at their disposal in order to contain this infection. Korea had been doing a really good job also. There were days in April, I don't remember when I spoke to you, but there were days in April and May where we were down to 0 infections a day in a country of 51 million people that had just had the second of the big outbreaks. Of course, now we thought we were doing okay until August, and all of a sudden, went up to 400 cases a day. But now they're back down to under 50. So it is possible. The thing is that, it's hard to imagine when you're sitting in the United States. So I was just back in Maryland. To imagine that, in a country like the size of China or even the size of Korea, that you would be able to get the number of infections down to a number under 100 or under 50. But it has to do with the way you do testing and treating and tracking and isolating people. And I just gave a talk last night with all the little things that came up on my cell phone, the one that I landed at the airport. And because I was coming from the United States, they did a swab. And they let me go home because, I live in Korea. So they allow you to go home, and they tell you, do not leave your house until you have received the note from us. And so 6 hours later, I get this text. Your test was negative. You're still on quarantine. Download the app. So I downloaded the app, and every day for 14 days, you have to fill out a questionnaire. And a lady from the local health authority, so the local public health, our district office, calls you and says, so we're checking on you. Any symptoms? And you've already filled out the questionnaire. Any symptoms? Are you okay? And one of my friends told me that there was something wrong with his phone, so it showed him, 100 meters outside his building. When she called him, she said, I'm just checking to see that you're in your building. And so they know that if you stepped out.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of 14 days, I filled out my form and they said, we want you to hit the confirm button. You're now done. No more quarantine. So everything was on your cell phone. I mean, it was really incredible, but it was really incredible, the testing, 6 hours. Turn around and the RT-PCR where they put that, the Q-tip up, way up your nose. So, and then the tracing, they employ lots of people to help understand where a person might have contacted the virus. And so we were actually exposed, my wife and I, we were at a charity event. And, it was one of these charity events where the company that ran the concert put you every other seat. So every other seat was blocked off. And there was no one sitting behind you. They were interspersed. And everyone had to wear a mask the whole time. And if you weren't wearing a mask, someone would run in from the side and pull your mask back on. Or if afterwards you were trying to take a picture with kids or something, and you took your mask off, someone would come and run and put your mask back on. So then we were told, like 2 days later, that we were exposed, that there was someone who, despite the warning in the front that says, if you have a fever, you should be at home, you shouldn't be here, they'd come. And so they said, until we can determine what your exposure was, don't leave home. So, we were home for maybe half a day. And a note came back from the local health authority. We reviewed all the CCTV footage. Everyone wore a mask, including the person who had the infection. So none of you are considered close contacts. So you're free. And so 14 days later, not a single person in that 200-person event was positive. But it was possible, they can, because of the level of compliance with masks and the tracking and the CCTV cameras, they can't access it all the time. They can only access it if there's an issue related to infection. So they can tell you, you're not a close contact. Don't worry. So again, it's interesting. It's a difference. I mean, in the United States, it was much more open. It's really hard to conceive of how you would do this, and you don't feel like they're threatening your freedom. Again, you have to kind of be here to understand what it's like when you hear that there's an outbreak in a church and 1,198 people out of 2,000 were infected, and they were packed in, not wearing masks. And then the government trying to find them, bring them in for testing. All of that took a month and a half to get under control. It doesn't take much to set it off. Anyway.
Well,
That's
we
where.
yeah.
Go ahead, Charles.
We had this problem, and as you can imagine, there's a complete overhaul of our Department of Health because of that fact. You alluded to the fact that the program is just so effective, and you felt that it's not intrusive, but yet, we had these high numbers, and yet no one really could tell if the tracing was being done correctly, because we don't know that if they followed up with tracing, if the tracing is going forward or it looks back. And it's like when someone comes to me and asks me that, maybe I present symptoms. So ground zero starts with me. They ask, if I should be infected. Then they ask me, did you come in contact with anybody else? I go, I tell them, yeah. But behind me, if somebody came in contact from that direction, I wouldn't know that person. And so I think that's the dilemma we are facing now, because we're about to open trans-Pacific travel. And we said this the other night with another doctor that we were on last night, is that it's very easy in Hawaii, because communities are small, that if we come in contact with someone from direct contact, we're basically able to call them out by name, because everybody knows everybody, right? But now when you get trans-Pacific travelers coming in, like from Idaho, first time coming to Hawaii, and they get exposed, how do you ask them, who you come in contact with and all of that other stuff? And it's like just a big blur to them. They don't know. So, it really begs one to ask, how does a program get streamlined to make it so effective that they can basically follow up with everybody? So we don't, because what we do know is every time there's an outbreak, we get a knee-jerk reaction from our government that shuts everything down. I mean, big time, to the point that our economy is ready to take a tank. And so that's what I think a lot of people are wondering right now.
Yeah. No, I just saw a statistic that Hawaii has one of the highest rates of unemployment
Yep.
in the United States. And, it's interesting that, how the reason the Korean government developed this system was, they had a much more traditional approach. So back in 2015, there was a big outbreak in Korea of something called Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is related. It's kind of like a cousin of the SARS virus. It's another coronavirus. And, they put 19,000 people in quarantine, but, I think 167 people were infected or so, and 37 people died. The MERS coronavirus, actually, the mortality rate was reported at that time at 40%. So it's a little bit different from SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19. But, the people of Korea felt the government had really messed this up because they really didn't know who was going where, who was being exposed, where infected people were, because it turns out that people don't remember, or sometimes they just don't want to tell the truth. And so they passed a law. The National Assembly, after debate and discussion, passed a law that allows the government to access cell phone data in a public health emergency. And they don't do it all the time, but during this last outbreak in August, there's a huge demonstration in one of the squares here, kind of like the National Mall in Washington, D.C. 20,000 people were there, including people from that church where there were 1,000 infections. And the government said, we can't, there's no way we can track all these people. There's no way that we can get all the CCTV cameras and things. We can't tell who was exposed to whom. So they used this law. They can keep the data for 14 days. They used the cell phone towers that were around the square, and they found out whose telephone was turned on during the time. And once you have their cell phone numbers, you text them a message that says, you've been potentially exposed, come in for testing. And then, people weren't always coming in, so they sent another message. Finally, they said, okay, look, if you don't come in, we're going to send the police out to have you brought back in for testing. But there are different mechanisms. And then, actually on your little cell phone, it pops up a warning if someone in your district actually had infection. They don't tell you who it was. They just said, someone in Soremungu had COVID-19 infection. I think we've had 100 or so far since February. And it tells you. And then if you want more information, you click on the website and you go, and it'll tell you so-and-so acquired infection as a part of this outbreak and may have been in this location, this location, this location. If you have symptoms, show this warning and you get a free test. And then 6 hours later, your test comes back. So actually say my wife, after we were exposed, said, my throat's kind of scratchy. And so she went in and got tested, and 6 hours later, it came back. She was negative. And 14 days later, she was fine. So we don't think she was exposed. But, the system works a lot differently. Maybe now that there are some tests that may be cheaper and rapid and can be done, don't necessarily require PCR, maybe those will be more useful in the US. Hopefully you can get enough of them out there so that you can really start to use it to inform people of the risk. And that's what it is, right? I mean, the average Joe Kim, Korean citizen, they just want to know that they're safe. And how do you do that? Because the government is telling you where you might potentially have been exposed. And I mean, maybe not on Kauai, but if you're in a big city like Honolulu and you're down in, I don't know, Fort Street Mall or Ala Moana Center or somewhere, you don't know who's around.
Well, Minnie Cole, we spoke with Minnie. I don't know if you ever got a chance to meet her yet, but she's from South Korea, originally from Oahu as well. But anyway, she went over the process back when she was on our show. She's been on our show a few times. She talked about the contact tracing app. She talked about the social media postings that go on for everyone to, she explained all of that. She even provided us with the PowerPoint presentation for the app that was offered to Hawaii for free. And of course it was denied, but we sent all of that in. And, you're right. Korea, I think generally the citizens of Korea, China, a lot of these foreign, especially Asian countries, their only care is to be safe. And you imagine if tomorrow the governor said or the president said that we're going to track cell phone towers to figure out if you folks were near a huge exposure. This country would go upside down. Guys would be yelling and protesting and screaming and but the same people are complaining about this virus. And if the question, going back to Charlie's question, can China have? Is it true that China could have only 2,000? Absolutely. If you do what they did, if you do what Korea did, then we would enjoy the same results. But are we
with
as a
no
people
lockdown.
willing? Are we as a people willing to do that? In Korea, when I was just there last year in Incheon, and that all of the cameras, man, I get cameras everywhere. But you know what? It made me feel extra comfortable and safe because the polls where they got the if you need help, you pick up the phone. You just push the button and talk to someone that's going to help you if you're lost. And if it's an emergency, you hit the other button and then someone will be there. But it takes cameras. But over here in America, hell no, man. And you violated my constitutional right to privacy. Jesus Christ.
Actually,
So
there's a problem in Korea too, and actually we just found out because our institute has CCTV cameras. I mean, because we are a BSL-3 lab, but it turns out that we didn't know that the law had changed, and that now on every floor we actually have to have at least one sign that says, you are potentially under surveillance. The following, and we actually have to have people sign consent, the people who work at IBI, so that the CCTV footage can be used. Now, there are some things like theft or break-ins or public safety where there are exceptions, but the law actually was put into place because of the proliferation of CCTV cameras in Korea. So there's an attempt to preserve some level of privacy, and I mean, you look at China, yeah, it's a billion people, and how could they have such a low rate? But when you look at Asia, Thailand has a low rate. There are lots of countries in Asia where they've succeeded. Now, in Thailand, they've closed the borders. And so this is a country that really does depend on tourism. But they managed to control, again, every country has to decide what they feel comfortable with in terms of privacy or security against infection and the economy. I mean, we can go to work. We can, until a couple of weeks ago, could go to a restaurant. Now the restaurants close at 9 o'clock. They closed the Starbucks for everything but, so big coffee shops for everything but takeout. But now they've reopened them. But they also now have to be distancing within the Starbucks because there were some outbreaks related to that. So, they respond to the outbreaks, and they try to change things in response to that.
but let's say the outbreak is in Seoul, or let's say it's in Incheon, or I mean, is the whole country shut down, or is it just relative to the actual infection?
So
the
there
exposure?
are specific levels for the country, and then individual localities. So the mayor of Seoul actually issued a series of additional closures. So at the time, there was an outbreak in a club in one of the entertainment, one of the areas where kids go, not kids, young people go. And the government, the Seoul mayor closed all the bars. Now they've opened again. And then they closed again. And I think I don't know actually if they've opened again because they open and close depending on the level of risk and what the government thinks is necessary in order to keep the number of infections under 100 a day, which is its goal. So it doesn't aim for 100, I mean, ideally 100%, zero infections. But they understand that, we have to live with this. Until we have a vaccine, until we've got people vaccinated, we're going to live with infection. And we just need to be able to, carry on, do the things we need to do, despite that, but do them safely. I think that's the balance. And every country has to find that balance. I mean, the UK was doing really well. And all of a sudden, the number of infections went like this. And the number of tests that they were doing relative to the number of infections started to dive. And it just gets to the point that, the virus will find the weakest point. And, in Seoul, it was, these large, it was churches, rainy season, it was a confluence of really unfortunate things that pushed people into a church sanctuary, and that's how it happened. Rather than staying outside in the tents that were out, I mean, the rain was coming down. I mean, it was really pouring that weekend.
How do you, what's your estimation? I mean, this is a loaded question when I'm going to ask it. uh, you know, I kind of look at the virus, I'm just a layperson trying to understand this thing. But at some point, I know I've been sick a few times. I've had a pneumonia a few times. You know that when it's coming, what time of year it's coming, and all of that. But and there's been times where I felt it really bad, and then there are times that, you outlast it. Do you see anything with COVID as being that it's gonna kind of taper off in its potency, or its load if you should get it? Because it's sort of like a toss up. Some people can be next to someone that's really sick, and if it's not your number, you won't get sick. But if it's your number, you're gonna get tagged by it. So I just was trying to find out, if there'll ever come a time when you think that this virus will start to taper off, will start tapering off. If
Yeah. So, if you look at other viruses, and so assuming that we didn't have a vaccine, this virus would reach some level of in the community, and it could reach a level that people are calling herd immunity. It could be that before then the virus undergoes some mutations that make it hopefully less severe, but equally could make it more severe. And so you never know with mutations. The current set of mutations appear to allow the virus to spread more quickly, slightly more quickly than the older versions of the virus, but it doesn't appear to be more deadly, which I think is very important.
Okay.
But in the setting of all this, remember now that mask use in the United States is actually much higher than it used to be.
Yeah.
It's still short of 100%, but that's protecting people also. So it's really hard to know, in the setting of all these things changing at once, what the most important thing is. And I really want to do a campaign, and actually we've been talking to one of these really famous ad guys. And what do? Do you have people with their mask on saying, "Say it, don't spray it," or do you have something where you write the names of the people you care about on your mask? Because you're not protecting yourself, you're protecting them. I mean, it's like when you get a flu shot, right? You may not need it. I mean, because you may not suffer a lot from the flu, but the people that you're protecting are, your parents or your grandparents, because if they get the flu, they get really sick and they could die. And so the same thing would apply to COVID. I mean, wear a mask and write the name of someone that you care about on that mask to remind you that the reason you're wearing it is not for yourself, but for others. And it's, in the beginning, we were emphasizing masks to protect yourself, but really, when the U.S. government, once the U.S. government came out and said everyone should wear a mask, what we're actually doing is saying everyone could potentially be infected. And the way we protect everyone is for everyone to say, okay, I'm doing this not for me. I'm doing this for, my neighbor, my grandparents, my parents.
Yeah. So if we were to look at the mask usage, I think it would be beneficial to find out during this flu season how much of the flu goes down that we can attribute to masks. I mean, that would be probably one of the best ways to say, look how effective the mask has been, right? So you can, because flu and the virus is both respiratory viruses, they'll probably relate the same in some way or another, because even the expulsion of the droplets, same patterns, right?
No, that's a great, and South Africa is South Africa is on the other side of the equator. So their winter corresponds to our summer. They've had one of the mildest flu seasons they've ever had. Now, they've also had lockdowns. So distance or masks, masks are a form of distance. Masks and distance are the two key elements. So maybe South Africa's lockdowns were preventing the spread of flu, but also, increased mask use, and no one really knows. But that's a good point, and it's going to be a really important thing to look at as the flu season goes on. And then, I mean, a third of people, I think, are still saying that they wouldn't vaccinate their children. And, we have to create a climate of trust again around what's right from a public health perspective.
Well, I know we had Dr. T. Chupkovsky, he was on, and he runs a clinic in Waikiki. And Charlie, remember he said that the people that are coming in with symptoms were not testing positive for flu or influenza. They were testing positive for COVID. It was the number of flu cases in our little area was drastically reduced. It'd be interesting to see worldwide what if, and I would assume it's the same. And not, taking out the lockdown countries or just the ones that are relying on mask and social distance. And I gotta believe that the influenza rate would be down.
Yeah, I think that's been the suspicion, although I think the WHO, the CDC, they're all saying, if we don't watch it, this could be a really severe flu season. But again, we hard to know in advance, and hopefully people will get vaccinated, and that will help.
All right. Well, we got about 10 minutes, and I want to respect your time. I know you're in a place in South Korea. I really love that place, by the way. We now have we're going to open up Trans-Pacific travel starting October 15th. The governor has decided that he's going to extend the inner island quarantine for our inner island travelers. So the inner island travelers will not be able to travel. On Honolulu, there's no quarantine, but on the neighbor islands, you quarantine. There's no option to get a test. So until the end of October, we're stuck. Trans-Pacific passengers coming to Hawaii can take a test at all these, wherever CVS, these little rapid tests. 72 hours before departure, they arrive and they have absolutely no requirement to quarantine. Unlike Korea, and I mean, what's your take on that as far as, because of the period of infection and the incubation of the COVID virus? Are we heading down a scary road?
So theoretically, right? I mean, and that's the only thing you can base this on. The reason for doing test in the beginning and maybe a test in the middle somewhere is that you might not be positive now, but the test probably doesn't measure, the test probably measures 5 days ago exposures or longer. It may not do such a good job on exposures of 3 days or less. And so, sometime in the course of the week you spend in Hawaii, you may turn positive. And we just don't know. Based on experience in other states, so Maine had a similar policy. I know because I just dropped my daughter off in college, and if you have to have a negative test. In fact, even if you're from Massachusetts, which is a state that is actually doing fairly well, I mean, still has issues, but you have to have a negative test, and Maine has not had that dramatic an increase. I mean, they have had more cases, so it's hard to know. So much of Hawaii depends on tourism, though, and the amount of interaction could be difficult. In Korea, we went to the beach. Of course, it was raining the whole time we were there. But they actually monitor the number of people who go on the beach, and you're actually asked to wear a mask. So again, I guess you'll be able to tell by the mask tans on people. They're actually doing it. But no, I think we haven't figured out, it's just like the schools, right? We know that at some point, schools are going to reopen again. We just have to do it in a way that manages risk. And no one has the book on that. And it would have been nice if a little bit of the pre-pandemic planning had included things like making sure there were stockpiles of gloves and trained people and trackers and then what do we do around opening schools? And so, the Korean government's operating in the dark, feeling its way through this one also. And, maybe 2 years from now, we'll have a smart book. Right now, we don't. So, you take a step forward, you see what the impact is, and then you adjust. That's kind of what you have to do if you're committed to opening. Just make sure that you can handle surges, that people know how to protect themselves, that, particularly people who are, wait staff and servers, need to be, they have to have appropriate protection. And then you see, you monitor and you keep an eye and you be waiting, you have to be ready to pounce on any outbreaks so that they get contained quickly.
Real quick, let me just, the numbers that they estimate, they're saying that they're looking probably 7 to 8,000 passenger or visitors a day coming into Hawaii. That's not counting returning residents, but just typically it's about 10,000 or whatever. So we're looking at about 8,000. They're estimating that 30% of the infected COVID passengers will pass through the process with the one test. So depending on where these travelers are coming from, right, the prevalence of each place they come from is going to play a major role. You come from a hot zone, you obviously your risks are higher. But at that 30% number on a one test system, and that's debatable. Some has said no, it's a lot higher. But even at 30%, when you look at Hawaii's resources, the medical resources with hospital beds and ventilators and ICU units, we could be overwhelmed relatively quickly. Whereas if we had done a second test 3 days after they're here or 4 days after, you could pretty much cut that number down drastically. I don't know if you've done any research on numbers like that, but that's what we're looking at here in Hawaii right now.
Yeah, it's the problem is the practicality of the second test. Now, how are you going to do that? I mean, do you force people to download an app that at day 3 says, you need to go and get your test, and if you don't, then it flags your name and turns it over to the local public health department, which is then responsible, or to the hotel you're registered at. So the hotel becomes responsible. So how do you enforce the second test? That's, I think, the most critical question that they have to deal with.
Because you guys are successful in Korea. If Mel Raposo went to Korea tomorrow, what would happen to me when I landed at the airport? What would happen? What would happen to me as a visitor, not a resident?
So assuming that you didn't have a place to go, you would get a test, and then you'd have to sit out quarantine in a quarantine center, which I'm told are not really comfortable for 14 days. So U.S. servicemen, because summertime is when they rotate, right? And so, there are a lot of service people in Korea, and they are actually forced to do 14 days of quarantine also, because, the U.S. military bases actually have been relatively free of COVID-19, and they want to keep it that way. So they enforce the quarantine going in, and people do turn positive.
Oh, yeah.
So, and some of them turn positive on day 13. So they wouldn't probably be picked up on the third day screen. So again,
So I arrive at the airport, I get a test in Korea. You guys not going to accept the paper saying that I tested negative 3 days before I arrived, right?
No.
So I arrive in Korea, I get a test at the airport?
At the airport, yeah. And then you're taken to the quarantine facility and you're kept there. Now, I was allowed to come home because I live here. And then, and so it's called self-quarantine. And, the little app does apparently track you. So again, and I was told by a friend who was in this quarantine thing that they do have access to wireless Wi-Fi and stuff, but it isn't a luxury hotel.
Yeah.
I'm told that they're thinking about doing that.
I would have to download the app. I would be tracked. I would be paid, but I'm in a facility, so there's no way I can leave anyway. I'm basically, and that is for 14 days.
14 days. And
that's why, what's your population now in Korea? South Korea?
51 million.
Okay, so, and that is why, people, 51 million, and you guys have how many cases a day?
So I don't know about today, but yesterday it was under 50.
Okay, so even, let's say it's 50 a day. Let's say it's 100 a day. But let's just say 50 to 100 a day, 51 million people, and Honolulu, 1.2 million, 120, 130, 140, 150 positives a day. Now you understand the difference, because they treat this thing seriously in other countries and in other states than we do here. And I think that's the point we're trying to make, is that if you want those numbers, like these other successful countries, then you got to be willing to do what they do. And that's kind of what the bottom line is.
Yeah, and I think that, it's a balance. Again, on the one hand, at some point, 19% of the population can't be unemployed, and there are all these other factors that go into this, and the question is, what are the privacy concerns? What are the how much tracking capability do you have? What's the reserve medical, staff, and what would you do if you ran out of hospital beds? So all of these things are things that the government has to consider. It's really hard to invent it on the fly. This is a part of pandemic planning and preparation that hopefully once this is over, people will have a way to say, okay, so we need to have the following. And if I were the United States, I would be thinking, you can activate the National Guard in a state. There should be a National Guard equivalent in the public health service so that, when the CDC has a guideline, it comes down and, we can implement it successfully in other parts of the United States. Because the last thing you want is to have a set of bad actors that are, the source of infections that are out of control. This is like, really, in my mind, this is like fighting a war. 200,000 Americans have died. And, we have a system, that's, I can think of a pidgin word, but that is, kind of all over the place. And really there needs to be consistency. I mean, the beauty in Australia, the government invited the provincial governments into the cabinet. So, Australia is like the US, it's a federal system. It's got states, and the prime minister said, okay, this is an emergency. The heads of all the states, the governors essentially, are now a part of the cabinet, of the central government's cabinet. And in Korea, the prime minister is in charge of, once it's a level 4 emergency, it escalates to the level of the prime minister again. So he is responsible. And the orders flow in but the US, it's one thing in Massachusetts, another one in Maine, who knows, North Dakota, and Hawaii. And, how are you? Yeah, anyway, you see the issue.
I had a question here. If they asked me to ask you if you thought the cross-reactivity of the cytotoxic T cells may be responsible for the low numbers in Africa.
Yeah, that's the low numbers in Africa could come from a lot of different sources. I mean, many of us suspect that there isn't appropriate testing yet. Part of it is that, the cities aren't that, you may see it in large urban areas like in outside of Nairobi, or, it's certainly a problem in South Africa. And there were outbreaks in Nigeria, but again, governments need to roll out testing and tracking and other things. And what South Africa did is every time it had an upswing, it stopped selling alcohol in it, and it had a lockdown. And, so those kinds of measures have been helping. Part of it may be that, the countries did in fact stop tourism from abroad. And we don't know if that will continue or not, and if they'll continue to be successful. I mean, I hope they are. We know that there are African countries, and as we've rolled out testing, we found more cases. So, but, for a while, many of the countries were very short on testing supplies and RT-PCR kits and gloves. So certainly the cross-protection, these cellular immune responses are really fascinating. And the seasonal coronaviruses are something that we've hardly studied because it's a mild case of the flu, And so we think that there isn't cross-protection, or the antibodies don't protect you. But there may be, less severe disease maybe from the cytotoxic T cells. So they don't prevent infection, but they may prevent some of the complications of disease. But I mean, that's a lot of speculation at this point. And, yeah, I mean, it's going to sound like an evil scientist kind of argument, but, the reason for doing challenge studies in normal, healthy volunteers is exactly to answer these questions. Because until we do, we won't know what the level of, so what we would do is we'd take say a 20-year-old who consents to do this, and we expose them to COVID-19 in an isolated setting where they get, hospital care, and they have access to all the best, the drugs that are available. Once they're infected, we monitor the level of infection-fighting proteins and these cytotoxic T cells in their blood. And then at some point, we re-challenge. And the question to ask is, what do you need in order to stay protected? And it's that kind of experiment that we do for malaria. We do it for dengue. We do it for other diseases, cholera. There are challenge models. And they're very important because they give us information that we wouldn't be able to have otherwise. But they're only done under, they have to be ethically sound. They have to be scientifically sound. We can't subject people to increased risk. There are already, I think, over 10,000 Americans who volunteered to participate in these trials, even though no one at this point is doing them. Now the people in England are considering doing the same thing, because there are all these questions that have to be answered, and rather than wait till the next outbreak, better to have the answers. Again, so it sounds like an evil scientist idea, but in fact, there's a lot of experience with other diseases where we've done this.
And that's what we hope, and that's what we thank people like yourself who, you guys are right in the middle of it, learning from all the different viruses, old viruses, and trying to get this thing knocked. We hope we can get to some level of normalcy soon. I really appreciate other countries that are able to do things that we aren't, and that's the success. Korea is Minnie told us that when she was on the show, you had very good numbers, and you never closed anything down back then. That was before the outbreak, but you were able to hang on to that low numbers for a long time. Everybody was working, everything was open, nothing closed, borders were open, flights weren't. Everything was all good, and it takes one infection, but you guys got a handle of it right away, and we can't seem to do that in America. And I'm not just talking about Hawaii, I'm talking about the country, because we got states that are flaring up and in a very high rate. So, but again, we do things differently, and because we're just not able to do what many of the, especially Asian countries are able to do. So, but anyway, Doc, it's 8 o'clock. It's a little beyond. It's, what is it, 2 o'clock there on Thursday?
3 o'clock in the afternoon.
3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. Oh, yeah, it's 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. How's the weather over there? So we know what it'll be like
It's
tomorrow.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Sunny, cool, and it's Chuseok, so it's today is actually the day of Thanksgiving.
Oh man, I apologize.
No. My wife's in Italy under quarantine right now, going to see her mom. So, yeah, we're.
Oh, okay. Well, then I don't feel as bad.
Yeah. Hey, no problem.
Anything you want to say to your friends back here in Hawaii that's watching? I'm sure you got some people on here that actually know who you are. I should have wrote.
Yeah. Hey, Sam. No,
Charlie,
I really appreciate time.
No, I really appreciate your time. Geez, it's like you're one of the top dogs. Charlie? Oh, you're muted, Charlie.
Yep, there we go. As always, I like to express deepest thanks to you, Dr. Kim, for coming on and sharing your expertise. I know it's always an evolution, like you said. This virus is when you least expect it, it'll do something that catches the entire science medical community just off guard, and you just got to be prepared at all times. To our viewers out there, as always, we bring whatever information we can to help inform and educate, and I hope tonight was no different, that it brought some light to many of you who haven't joined us before, but got to hear from a world-class vaccine individual that specializes in this. And so I'm hoping that the takeaway is what he said, and that is, continue to wear your masks, practice your social distancing, but do everything possible that you can control. Because if we leave it up to the government to do it all the time, as you can well imagine, there's always a little something that happens and people fall through the cracks, and we want everybody to be safe. So again, thank you again, Doc. I appreciate it very, very much.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Mel.
Doc, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you, and our viewers appreciate you. A lot of people were waiting for this day. I think you rank up there, probably one of the best. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I got to go back and look at the comments, but I think you were ranked the best. And I'm serious. So when we put it up that you were coming back on, a lot of people were excited. So appreciate your time, appreciate your knowledge, your information, and We'll get to do it again one day soon, my friend.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you. You stay safe, sir.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Talk to you guys tomorrow
Bye.
night, 7 o'clock. Tomorrow night, Andrea Tupola talking about unemployment and COVID. Aloha.
Aloha.